Well, good afternoon, everybody. I officially got notice that we're on video, so no misbehaving. That'll be it'll go on the official archives. My name is Ryan Krohn. I'm the director at the Institute for Personalized Learning. We'll talk a little bit about where that is here in just a second. But before we begin, this is the time that I have to give you the phone's message. Now, normally I would tell you to power down and turn your ringers off and all those things, but I have a different question for you at this point. I just need to know, what is your favorite feature on your phone? What is your favorite thing that your smart device does? And you have to. This is the easiest question you're going to get today. So, anybody willing to share? Your calendar. Thank you. Anyone else? I'm sorry, what?
It remembers all my numbers.
It remembers things for you. Great spot. Thank you.
Pretty basic.
You like the camera? FaceTime. Meditation app. Nice. The music app. Okay. Spotify? Come on, I need two more, and I need a good sample size. Texting. The restaurants. Find where to eat. I'm going to use that in an hour. I don't know where to eat yet. I'm going to rely on my phone. So, I'm sorry, what? 360 Live. All right. So the reason I ask is that I ask that question a lot. Almost every presentation I give. And I have yet to have anyone in the audience tell me that their favorite feature of their phone is that it makes a phone call. Okay? We're going to move on that here for a second in our presentation today. And we're going to get to maybe why that is and what that is. The title of our session, as you saw before, is The Learner, a resource we can count on. I'd say or depend on or rely on. We got into this phone game and we compare what we have right now, and you just named a number of features that you count on, you depend on, and you rely on. Whether it's maps, whether it's texting, whether it's communication, whether it's music, whether it's for meditation, whatever that might be. Those are a series of features on here that we count on, we depend on, and we rely on. If I ask you to sign a contract here today for the next 2 years of which device between these two you would pick, for the most part, and I know there's always somebody in the audience that loves the landline, but for the most part, majority of us would pick this. And the reason we pick it is because of all the things that we have come to depend on, to rely on, and to have as a part of our life. It wasn't always the case. As a matter of fact, the only feature that the first version came with was that it made a call just someplace else. Up until that point, we were struggling with who could buy the longest cord. And if you're a teenager, you try to walk 25 feet away from your parents versus 5 feet as you're on the phone call. Or if the cordless phone was invented, you might get staticky at the end of the driveway or down the hallway. This investment versus this investment is a completely different investment. This one doesn't have the additional features for something that we would invest in, that we rely on. It didn't even bring really a value add to us, the cost, the dependability, the reliability. This is our storyline today as we talk about learners, and even more importantly, when we talk about making an investment in personalized learning. What we often hope we get, which is a student, that has all of these features, but yet what we often get when we begin, and the key word is begin, is we get this. A student who has been only asked to receive information and provide information, like a phone call. For the most part, our instructionally designed education system was designed for us to deliver information like I'm doing right now and for you to receive it. For us to ask it to do something else or expect that the people who have been sitting in these chairs for a long time to do something else is going to take some time. The good news is, what we have seen over the last number of years is that investment in our learner as a resource has become something that we can depend on, we can count on, and we can rely on, and most importantly, that will power the personalized learning movement. So now we've got to talk about phones. I've got to take you back into history. What is something that you put up with along the way in relation to your relationship with your mobile device? Like, I put up with nights and weekends. One time I could make free calls at 9. That was a big deal in my life when that came out. I can make as many calls as I want at 9 o'clock. That was a big deal. That was a plan I had. I think it was like this phone. What are some of the things we put up with along the way?
Getting out of your zone and having a high grade.
Yeah, signals, roaming, like drop calls. What else? What do we put up with? I'm sorry. The number of minutes, counting those minutes, it'd run out or get charged like $100 if you want to. I'm sorry, what?
Texting with the number pad.
Texting with the, yeah, 3 punches to get to the letter Q, like terrible, horrible, worst thing ever. How about those pictures? Someone said they love the camera on their phone now. What about this camera? It's like, and the ability to use that or to share it or depend on it, like, oh, I can take a picture, and everybody would say, well, so what? Now you can take a picture, and people will depend on you being able to, it's okay to look at pictures this way, it's okay to send them, it's okay to crop them, edit them. We put up with a lot along the way. At this point in time, we held on to something, probably our camera. At this point in time, we held on to something, probably our maps in our glove box. At this, maybe we still have them, they're good, they're symbolic, they're historic. At this point in time, we held on to something. Maybe it was still our landline at home. There's things that we held on to that eventually, as we go through a transformation, we eventually let go on because it reaches a point, I'm not promoting Apple or anything here, but it reaches a point where the features become so dependable and reliable. This is the story of today's session here about the learner, a resource we can count on. That one of our responsibilities will be, as we look to make this work, is to understand that if we've only asked this of the system for a long time, to expect this is our vision, but it takes time to grow it. The second piece would be, we need to have a real clear understanding that it's not, that is not the fault of the student, and it's not the fault of that phone for what it is. At the Institute, we really are clear in that we don't blame learners, educators, we don't blame parents, board members, community members, and school leaders. We blame the design. And we also think that the design can be changed to bring forward the features we want. But it takes us intentionally putting them in and intentionally saying, we want our learners to have this feature. We usually say the opposite. We usually say, I can't believe it, these kids don't care. I can't believe it, they don't know how to manage their time. They don't do their homework. They don't really know how to apply their learning. They don't know how to work in teams. Those are things we say in a negative standpoint, usually in a parking lot, usually after a rough day. The reality is to move from that end of the continuum to the other side to say what we want them to do. Because when we talk in the positive what we want, we're defining the feature that we want. Because this phone did not have GPS, or if we just saw had like, well, it has it, but it has just a small version. This phone has a high functioning one that not only is there, but also sinks into your life that is usable and part of our goal. Starts usually what I just said with a they can't. Our challenge is to flip that model and to understand why they can't, because they haven't been asked that. They can't read when they enter our system either, but we're not sitting up there right now saying that they can't take on the role of being literate. It's the same thing about nurturing a powerful learner. This is our timeline. I said I've been with the Institute for Personalized Learning. My last 20 years, I was a district administrator and a building principal and an educator. The last 2 years, I've been at the Institute as the director. We started in 2010 with a series of research papers and white papers around why we should transform education. It was happened, we're based in Wisconsin. We do a lot of work in Wisconsin, but across other states as well. This is our why message. You can find our publications online if you're interested. This is our what storyline. Our what became a change strategy based on personalized learning elements that nurture powerful learners and not just proficient students. Our what became a book written by Jim Rickabow. He's tomorrow's keynote at lunch. He was our director before I joined the team. He's now our senior advisor. That tells the story. The title of it's called Tapping the Power of Personalized Learning, the power being the learner and the power being the goals that they have. Our what became a storyline of what we were doing. So we had this why moment, why we would engage in this in the first place and invest our time and energy. A what criteria, which is, I believe, is a really nice foundation for me to work off of, but we're moving into more of a how conversation. We have some leadership design academies, some micro-credentials, but most importantly, a how. What I care most about is how do we move tomorrow's lesson to be more personalized than today? How do we start to shift our thinking to realize that that iteration process of phones is the same iteration process that we're going to see with our learners so that we can see and they can see themselves as a resource to their own learning? I had to ask this question in my session a couple hours ago. It's a question I usually ask because it frames the day of what we care about. I asked this question, what do you believe a student needs to know and be able to do in order to graduate and be an active member in society? And I usually get two lists. and this side is always more than the other side. I usually hear that they need to be a co-designer, they have to have grit, they have to have perseverance. The other side I don't hear too much about when I ask that question, about that they have to have a certain level of attendance but if I move the question mark, and here's the question again, when I move the question mark in order to graduate, I start to hear about policies, I start to hear about credits, I start to hear about seat time, I start to hear about attendance or civics exams. When I leave the question over here, the question mark, sorry, I start to hear about the learner. So here at the Institute, we sort of split these into two storylines. Us about understanding and nurturing a powerful learner, and that if a student can learn these things, no matter what these things are, what we want them to learn in class, in our grade level, or what they're going to be asked to learn for their life and their career, that they'll be prepared for it. We called it an investment in the learner to get whatever learning we want. There's an organization that has trademarked the term learnability quotient, or an LQ, which is very different than an IQ, right? That group is called the Manpower Group, and actually, if you Google, you can take an LQ test online. It takes 5 minutes, but it's really a different story. And the storyline is that we know there was a time when we could learn what we learned, and what we needed to learn, we could learn and be prepared for the next 30 years or 20 years. But we know now, we've heard it for long enough to know that it's true, and seen that it's true, that careers and jobs and expectations will rely on one thing. Not us being trained in something now, but our ability to learn and unlearn and relearn forever. We bring these two lists to sort of separate these two things about our work, which is us to try to be an investment in a powerful learner. And that when a learner takes on these features, like on our phone, it is something that we can start to depend on and count on and rely on the same way we depend on our phone to be able to provide us with a GPS, to be able to make a call, and be able to communicate. Imagine waking up in the morning and thinking that your learners were going to play that role and you could count on it. Imagine the powerful shift that it would play in how you designed your lesson, how you built your classroom, how you communicated and gave feedback, what the learner was doing. I'm excited to say there's many schools that do that intentionally by design, and I'm going to share some examples of those here today. I can also say that the investment in this side clearly gets the results on this side, not only now, but even probably more importantly, in the long term. I said this 3 times here so far, so I'll put it in writing, but this is not a definition, but these are things that we really care about. These are sort of our values. Of all the things we could do in this world for personalized learning, we care most about the practices that do this. What are the practices that do this, that nurture a powerful learner, that build the capacity in the students to learn? Those practices were not invented by the Institute. They weren't invented by a company. They've been around forever. They are practices that position the student to be an active participant in their learning experience. Our storyline is to bring those to the top of the heap, to bring those into practices that are high leverage and are getting the results that we want. This is a story of a double S-curve. I got a chance about 10 years ago to design a school based on this idea. I'll go through this quick. This is the life cycle of an organization. This is the end of it. This is the beginning of it. This is a time of rapid growth. This is a complete gap of a new life cycle starting. It's called a double S-curve or an S-curve. The idea being that something comes to an end for something to emerge. I'm confused on my day because I know we started at 11. But earlier today I did a session. I said, you can call this Blockbuster. You can call this Netflix. They have a different function, a different design, and in order for a break to occur, we start to talk about that. This could be your landline. This could be a cellular line. This could be Volvo, a new company, said that they're done building gas-powered engines. They're not a new company, but they're moving in a new direction. This could be their gas-powered engine industry. This could be the new hybrid industry for Volvo, for the company. It's going to require a different set of ideas or processes or life cycle for what their primary function is and how they will design their leadership and their work. I think of this for us as the idea of the end of an instructional paradigm and the start of a learning paradigm. At one time or another, the idea of bringing this forward was important for our world, for our nation, for our communities. And we built a phenomenal model where we had physical buildings, provided great standards, provided highly trained educators, and delivered instruction in an incredibly efficient model and manner for the first time. It was our first iteration of what school could look like. We also got to a spot that somewhere along this trajectory for us, school and learning was for some kids and not all, or what we learned and how we taught sort of matched what society was asking for. We're at a spot now where we know what the skills that students need to know and be able to do have changed. We also are at a spot now where our primary function is learning for all students, relevant learning for all students, and redefining learning as more than just content acquisition. That's the leap that we're into. That's the moment that we're at. We use hexagons all the time. I apologize. This is just to hypnotize you into liking hexagons. But what we really do is we talk about what ideas or what elements are out there, which ideas and what elements start to nurture a powerful learner, and how do we position those in our system intentionally. I'm going to give you 3 assumptions here, but I'm going to give you stories of schools that are doing this right now, that understand that the learner is a resource. So much so that the stories you'll hear are real, and they're impactful, and they're getting huge results. So here's some assumptions that we'd have, and I'm going to show you a school here. Here's some assumptions that might run our system. Remember, we're leaving one paradigm and going to the other, where efficiency might be more important than effectiveness, or time is held as a constant. This last one, I lived this about 10 years ago. Now here's the story. Waukesha STEM Academy, school that I got a chance to get a grant to start about 10 years ago. See the double S curve in there? It was influencing me about a decade ago. It's a little pixely, I apologize. The idea was that our STEM school was going to open. It's a K-8 school with about 800 students in it. STEM, as we know, stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math. I was a principal at the time. I was supposed to start this thing up. It happened to be in 2009 that I was doing this, the same time that the Institute on our timeline was starting, so I had a chance to partner with Jim Rickabow and this team and think about it. I went to a number of conferences to learn about what we really wanted to do, and we decided that STEM was going to stand for Strategies That Engage Minds, rather than Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math. That was our what, but our how of Strategies That Engage Minds would be more important. And we were going to nurture powerful learners. We were going to provide them with an opportunity to learn and form an identity of a scientist and an engineer, all the things that we had strived to do. We'd remove grade levels. We'd be one-to-one, which 10 years ago was kind of a big deal, and some other pieces. All things I'd never done before in my life, and all kind of the moment of truth for us putting our toes up to the line and saying, let's try to figure this out. I got to do it among an amazing group of educators and teachers that when I was interviewing them to be a part of this school that I got to design from scratch, I didn't even know what interview questions to ask them, but I was thinking about it. It became clear in the interviews that when they were talking about that they saw their role as more of an academic success coach rather than a keeper of content, or they saw their role as helping students facilitate or design an experience, you knew they were a good fit. As the school came forward and the school emerged, we developed a model called Connect, based on a classic middle school moment. So I'm walking down the hallway, and a lunchroom aide said to me, he said, Ryan, so-and-so, you need to talk to so-and-so. I think it was, make up the name, right? Susie or Johnny, one of those other names we always throw out there. In the lunch line, they were flicking each other's ears, and they tattled on each other. And for whatever reason, I was walking down the hall that day, and the teacher said, and I didn't have really the patience to deal with it, got a chance to talk about it at a staff meeting after school. And I said, I'm getting a bunch of reports about the lunch line and kids in the lunchroom. To which a staff member who I highly value, remember I'm talking about this topic here for a second. The staff member who I highly value said to me, well, Ryan, we should just give them assigned seats in the lunchroom and make them raise their hands to get them in line. Okay, now this is Amy said this, the teacher Amy. And Amy was a literacy teacher who read every single book that her students were reading in her Reader's Workshop model so she could have the best conferring conferences with them ever. So huge investment in kids, huge belief that kids could select their own just right book every day, huge opportunity that when it came to control and compliance, they needed this rule. Her idea was seconded by about the majority of the staff until somebody else said, we should do the opposite. We should just give them an open campus and not make them stand in line. For whatever reason that day, I had to really think about our goal of a school, which was to nurture powerful learners, which is to ask them about making wise decisions, which is to ask them, what was our real investment in kids going to be? This is a simple lunch line story. The reality was I picked the side of Chris and Tina that day. It was 2 against 50 on our staff of what we should do. So I went with the 2, which is not the best move. But the reality was, we talked about it, it was most aligned, those 2 were most aligned to the values of what we wanted. In time, we said, not only we take the 30-minute lunch period, we made it into an hour. So I stole content acquisition minutes from our teachers, which they reminded me of. One of my favorite teachers, John, said to me, Ryan, you're taking 3 minutes of my time, which was to deliver content. Our vision was simple. It was called Connect. Every day we wanted students during that 1 hour time, they could do whatever they wanted. They could go outside and play football, they could sit and listen to music, they could want all the things that people were complaining about that they were doing, we said they actually could do. We also put on the other end of the spectrum what we wanted them to do. So here's their worst and here's their best. What did we want them to do? We wanted them to self-assess. We wanted them to understand the proficiencies that they were being asked to meet in their classes. We wanted them to learn how to advocate for themselves and use their voice and communicate and go find an adult. We wanted them to work on peers and with their peers on projects. We wanted them to enjoy school and make choices and start to learn how time management. And we were far from it. Back to the phone pictures I just showed you. We built this board. These are all the teachers' names, Monday through Friday. Because it was an hour, teachers had a 30-minute duty-free lunch, so we still had contracts to work within and other things. And the teachers started to write what they were doing. Here's John Thompson, he wrote lunch, and he wrote science open lab. Here's some other teachers, a literacy teacher regarding writing support, other things like that. They didn't know what to put in the boxes at first, but they put stuff. And then we had the big debate about what kids would do. So like my dog, every morning when I open the garage, he's a little bit untrained. He runs like 3 doors down, and then he gets there without any purpose and ends up coming back home because he realizes that's where he eats and other things. But other than that, that's what happened when Connect started. All the students left, they went outside, they hung out, they were noisy, they were loud, they didn't know what to do. And like the phone story I just showed you, they didn't have those features developed in them. It was their first version of having real time in their day to really manage. A lot of the teachers reminded me of what a poor decision it was during this time, and I had to do a lot of reminding of what our vision was. And our vision during this piece, again, back to developing a system of really thinking that there was a chance to put learners in a position they would commit to their learning rather than about compliance. And I was willing to take on this risk. It started slow, but we got a little bit momentum. All of a sudden I heard about those kids that knew how to do Connect. Oh, those good kids that knew how to manage their time, that knew they missed class and would show up in a science lab to do something else. Then I started to hear about other kids that we wanted to put on a list that were so far behind we wanted to make a list of kids that had to go to Connect. Those kids that couldn't do it. Let's just not let them even try. Let's just get them in here as quick as we can. The good news was it slowly turned. We said instead of making them come in here, why don't you talk to them about sort of the skill set, the way you would talk to them about learning how to graph a line on a graph. Start to build the skill like you would any other thing you teach. Next thing you know, these classes started to fill up. Some of the teachers even on Friday started to add some fun things like guitar club and coding, some other things that were not our standards, but definitely were a spot to connect and get to know kids. The interesting piece was, over time we started to see trends. We started to see that all kids could do it, but some of them had different ways to get there. We also started to see that other kids started to be able to advocate for themselves. The biggest feature is what teachers didn't see what they were doing. They were beginning to design lessons and experiences based on proficiencies that students were becoming clearer and clearer about what they needed to learn, and it was driving and continuing to drive what Connect was. Fast forward a year later, 2 years later, and now even 8 years later, I have 2 middle school kids of my own that go to this school, so I get a close view of this. They use Connect every Wednesday for the entire half day. The last 6 weeks of school last year, they had Connect for the entire afternoon every single day. It's transformed the entire instructional model that they no longer have classes that are designed in a traditional way of where they were. Kids know how to advocate for themselves, how to self-assess, they know what their proficiencies are. The school has moved in 8 years to be in sort of one of Wisconsin's top models in terms of a personalized proficiency-based model school. Imagine on this thing now, instead of independent, imagine 4 science teachers in that school that have moved their curriculum from 6th, 7th, and 8th grade I teach alone to all of the proficiencies that students have an open lab experience and they're always mastering things almost like demonstrating competency in there and kids moving through at different paces. It's a really good story to follow. It's probably one of the best lessons I've learned in terms of really sort of understanding what we value kids to be and where an entry point for this work was, but what we really meant by making an investment. I showed the phones earlier about two things that we would invest in. And we either continue to invest in the landline structure that we have and what we ask of kids, or we truly make a commitment to the next version, not realizing that the very first cell phone version that we had, when we said, oh, it can make a call someplace else, would lead to, it has our favorite music app, it allows us to do meditation, it allows us to connect and learn, it allows us to other things. Those are the features that are starting to emerge with learners regarding personalized learning when we talk about making an investment in the learner. Let me go to this one a second. This school became so invested in their piece. This is Kettle Moraine School District. They built what's called a learner independence continuum. I'm going to give you some tools to build one here in just a little bit. This idea, they came up with 3 columns: students waiting, students hovering, and students driving. The whole concept here, again, and everything I'm showing is on a continuum based off of this very central idea about the learner as a resource. This school is one of the district leaders in Wisconsin, Kettle Moraine. They host visits all the time. They're doing some great work. 6 years ago, it was a traditional middle school. 10 years ago, I was the principal of this middle school, so I've got a chance to get to know it. It was a traditional school teaching traditional subjects. The teachers define what it looks like when students wait. They made up their own words. They always need the teacher involved. They kind of think all the things that we'd say what they can't do. They also built this continuum of what it looks like when a student's driving their learning. Learner knows when and how to get the teacher involved. Learner asks questions of others and of self to process new information. They're starting to define the role of a learner, just under the ideas of learner independence. The idea here, in looking at the learner as a resource, is they started to go public with this. They built this with their students. The students have input on what the benchmarks are. They built it as teachers. It led to them a couple of years later going public with this. It's posted on the walls. But most importantly, if you talk to their superintendent, Pat DeClotz, or their assistant superintendent, Teresa Ewald, they'll tell you it's beginning to change the way that teachers design lessons. Teachers are now designing lessons for students to be in this role because it's an intentional part of their school day. Just as intentional as math standards are, just as intentional as they teach science at 10 o'clock. This has now become an intentional way. It started at their middle school, now it's part of their elementary with new language, it's part of their high school, it's part of parent and teacher conferences, it's part of student goal setting and reflection. What I really like is by design, it's a part of what people use now as a frame of reference for how they're designing lessons. I mentioned earlier today, when you get to the point with your phone that you depend on, you count on, rely on other features, waking up in the morning knowing that that's there. I woke up the other day knowing that my phone was going to have my boarding pass on it. I woke up knowing the other day that my phone was going to have a GPS model to get there and other pieces. I also left here knowing that my phone was going to allow me to text my kids at home while I'm gone for a couple days. That's depending on, counting on, relying on. And I stopped doing other things because I now have that piece in my place. This is the same thing here. Their stop list is pretty interesting. If you think about instructional models, they've stopped lecturing for 52 minutes. They've stopped asking for this, asking for that, and their stop list continues to grow as more and more learners have the ability to select how they're going to learn. Even one of the teachers had said, we've stopped designing assessments on our own as more and more kids are demonstrating evidence of how they're learning on their own in relation to standards. Who would have thought you'd maybe stop building assessments based off of a model where you're starting to count on the learner as a resource in the environment? So there's some mental models I can throw up here, and I'm going to give an example of a school that's starting to change these. So the first one is some assumptions. What about learning only has value if it happens at school? Insight looks like a company. It's out of Pewaukee High School. They started a program called Insight. J.J. Hesch did. He said, I don't like the way kids are learning in my business class. And then he said to some other teachers in the lunchroom, they didn't like the way they were learning either. They combined about 6 or 7 courses together to create a program called Insight. Students can opt into it like an elective, but basically it's off-site. They got a building and a room donated. There's a lot of programs out there like this. But students are working in internships, in jobs, and other things. Their job in this is to learn, to grow, to become, to do work, where it starts to demonstrate, and they have projects and capstone experiences where they show and then they get credit for what they show that they can know in relation to standards. They've made a nice conversion of here's the classes we used to teach, here's some standards for the different learning, here's the experience and the experience that the kids will have, here's where they count. Instead of 3 separate credits here, it's one giant experience there. There's different models for that about learning inside and out. Usually, though, this starts from a full model that's about their 3rd year here. Usually this, I'm sorry, I'm clicking all over. Usually this starts with a really simple model. I was an assistant superintendent in a school district that had a requirement that all middle schoolers took Spanish. Anyone have something like that? Anyone? Maybe? Okay, it was one of the requirements in order to be a middle schooler, I guess. This was a district, though, that had about 35 to 40% of the students spoke native Spanish at home and were fluent in it. So for years, kids would go to that class and sit and be reminded about the words that they already knew how to say. Till somebody came and advocated for this, didn't make any sense. It pushed onto some policies and structures. Again, we're talking about this idea here about learning only as values that happens at school. Then they were told you didn't have to go to class, which was even worse, but they didn't give them an alternative. So now it's like we're not seeing you as anything more than a placeholder, but you don't have to. There's probably a cost savings in there somewhere for somebody for a FTE. The reality was somebody continued to advocate for all the talents that these kids have. And it pushed on not only that, but it pushed onto some assessments that were designed to kids to demonstrate their competencies, which led to them getting AP credit, which led to them graduating, getting a seal of biliteracy, which led to them being seen as having talent and gifts beyond sort of what school had done. It also pushed on policies and frameworks at a school board level, and it also pushed on now every other subject in that district. So what about the child who does artwork at home all night, or does coding, or creates games, or works, or writes papers, or does anything else? It's really pushed on the system. At first it was okay to do this in Spanish, and all of a sudden the school board was frozen when it was asked, what about this child here who has the job at an auto mechanic shop? Do they need to take autos in high school to get a credit for an elective? What about this athlete who is doing this? What about this student who is writing poetry? What about? So the idea in recognizing anywhere, anytime learning and learners as a resource is about recognizing the talents that they might bring with them, and also about us as a design starting to recognize and count on that as a system, and not necessarily always saying, here's the enrollment that we have, here's the amount of FTE that we're going to have, we're going to put them in a place with teachers that are based on a system for that, and eventually that counts as school and will award credits. But many of our models are designed that way, that we look at enrollment to higher staffing, we look at places for kids to go, and we look at awarding credit through that model. It's a push that's beginning. We're continuing to see more and more models, but in terms of counting as the learner as a resource, this is a big thing for a community and society even begin looking at, even a board member, of where are we at and what our students have. There's the UW program I mentioned in the last one. It's a full degree program. It's called the UW Flex Options. They have a quote in there, and you can look up how this all works. It says, if you know it and can show it, you can use it to earn credit. It doesn't matter where you've learned it. This is a full degree program, the UW system in Wisconsin. And that's for a number of degrees. You can start anytime you want. Their teachers are called academic success coaches. Their job is to provide you with the resources and supports you need to pass the assessments that they've created that would demonstrate some clear competencies. But again, their key is if you know it and can show it, and they say it doesn't matter where you've learned it. Interesting that that's a full university program for these models. Last one about some metaphors. What if we thought of learners less as empty vessels and more of resources to support their learning? The title of this session is, the learner, a resource we can count on. This one really gets at sort of that idea of starting to think about them here. Examples like the Flight Academy. FLIGHT stands for Facilitated Learning Through Integration, Guidance, High Expectations, and Technology. When you walk into this school, the students are asked 3 questions. They are given 3 questions, and it guides the entire school. What are you going to learn? How are you going to learn it? And how will you show it? One end of the spectrum at that school is the teacher goes home at night and designs a lesson based on the standards, designs a lesson for how the kids will learn it, and designs an assessment. The other end of the spectrum is students having 100% control of that. This would never work, right? Well, it's working at the Flight Academy. Jeff and Krista started this about 4 years ago. It was just 2 teachers with 60 kids. It's now 7 teachers with over 200 kids learning this style. And they will tell you without a doubt that that first iteration of the flight was just like the first iteration of your phone. It had barely any features. They invest so much time in that, but they'll also tell you that the investment of students understanding clearly where they're learning based on their previous assessment or what they're learning, how they learn best, what their best learning environment is, and how they demonstrate their understanding of learning is what the key feature of that school is right now. That's the idea in terms of them of not only being empty vessels, but understand that they are a resource to support that. This is the UW Flex model I just shared with you as well about empty vessels or not. But I code things with honeycombs because that's my job. But this was the storyline of if you know it and can show it, you can use it to earn credit, advance at your own pace, key competencies. So what if the world now looks a little bit more like this? This has actually subscription periods instead of semesters. But what if the world now for our learners, remember we said about nurturing a powerful learner, looks more like this? That the world is open for learning, that there's going to be assessments, whether that's in their job, whether that's at school, whether that's a demonstration of learning that they're going to have to be prepared for, that will show them their key competencies right here. So here's a student, no matter what it is they're going to learn. There's a place to, here's the assessments, here's the competencies. Academic Success Coach, if you click on that, you'll find probably a job description of the future for educators that talks about what their role is. Your coach will help you prepare for assessments and point you to the learning resource that you need to succeed. A very big shift in here, but a real shift, which is the learner and seeing themselves as a learner and having that sense of learnability. These are some models. I call these a constellation. To understand our constellation, you have to understand our honeycomb. I'm going to skip this. Our honeycomb is this. In a nutshell, we have three core ideas we're walking towards. Learner profiles, customized learning paths, and proficiency-based progress. That's our learning paradigm. Away from the instructional paradigm that might be opposite, where you only know the grade or the age. You don't get to customize it too much, and it's based more on seat time. These are some of our core ideas. This layer is the layer of teaching and learning. This layer is the layer of roles and relationships, and this layer is the role of structures and policy. This session is about this layer. This is the role of roles. This is our layer of roles and relationships. And we think our work and our strategy goes like this. You think about something you want, whether it's core proficiencies or a customized path or your learner profile. Find practices that are an investment in nurturing a powerful learner. Understand the role shift and understand structures and policy. We call it our constellation development. For the most part, the Flight Academy and those other schools had models that were happening. For example, even at the STEM Academy, proficiency-based progress was the goal of Connect. We wanted students to self-assess based on the proficiencies that we had. We provided them with an opportunity to have greater choice incorporated into their day. That was in the Connect time. We wanted learners to see themselves as a resource or have sort of a shared commitment to success where teachers weren't tracking them down and making lists. We wanted to recognize that there was some flexible time and place. That might be the first constellation for Connect. Where other examples that you would see are some of these ideas that we would like to have or we're building in. How about the learner profile one, where we had students that we wanted to recognize students in the learner profile. I spoke Spanish at home. Providing here with maybe being a little bit more culture responsive, but also building it together an understanding of community engagement or the learners seeing themselves as a resource and not seeing it as a detriment to their life, but as a resource to their life. And then sort of recognizing here, anywhere, anytime learning or other pieces. So I went back to this because each model that we have, what we normally do, this is our framework. This is the Institute's framework. It was built over time. It's been revised over time. But our goal in bringing this to life when we said how is about finding an entry point, whether it's a lunch line, whether it's somebody that's looking for credit or proficiencies for a language that they speak or other things, and building a plan together. So here's the last one. And I'm just going to leave this for you guys for a second to get some conversation started. Our big goal is this shift. Just got to check time. And here's kind of an activity. I'm going to go through an activity that we normally do regarding the learner as a resource. I did this a lot today. I walked back and forth. I was pacing, but I was also showing the continuum of moving from we call it a learning continuum, or in this place, the learner as a resource. And I've showed you that one. Our idea is about students moving from where our job is to motivate kids to care or to do their work or to be on time or to put their device down, to where they have a level of engagement by design, to where it moves to a level of efficacy and start to see themselves as a resource and a value, where they start to have a sense of ownership of this is their life, this is their work, this is their experience, to where they have a level of independence. This is our big picture frame. Jim Rickabaugh, who you'll meet tomorrow, wrote an article called The Learner Independence Continuum. It has a nice set of features to it and it's a lot more detail than I'm giving you right now. Our goal is to get it into practice. So no matter what element you might pick regarding learning and teaching or roles and relationships, the example I showed you from Kettle and Moraine of their learner independence continuum is an activity that we normally do, and here's how it kind of plays out. We ask people to start to describe a vision that they have for the learner. What do you want them to do? We often complain about what they're not doing. What do we want them to do? I wanted students in that to be able to manage their time, to self-assess. We wrote all of those down on one end of the spectrum, and I took everything we were complaining about what kids can't do on the other. We built our bookmarks, or our bookends. We identified who was going to use this. I mentioned at Kettle and Moraine, teachers used it first, but then they built it with students, and then they used it with parents, and then they used it to design lessons. So you put headers on there. They used wait, hover, drive. I've seen a ton of examples, and I'll show you what other people use. And then create descriptions. This was the one I showed you before. Here's one that Bob made. Bob's a friend of mine at a middle school. From they have to be led to it's shared to its own. They use the Patriot Learning Continuum on something else. This was learner as a resource. This was learner independence. This was personal learning goals. They just did it around a practice. They wanted to see kids move from their goals are always given to them. They co-develop or they develop their own personal learning goals. This one is around structured, guided, and independent around learner as a resource. So different schools, different levels, different goals. I have about 50 or 60 of these developed this summer in terms of how schools are using them that I can share if you're interested afterwards. This one was just about bringing proficiency-based progress into a school. Their goal was to build a continuum where students understand where are they now to where learners are consistently and independently use proficiency-based progress to develop customized learning experience. Look at that one. Like that's a pretty detailed one in terms of how they went with format. Again, identify bookends, understand how you might use it, build descriptors, begin to talk about maybe the pain moment, and begin to talk about the goal moment. I'm going to leave this up. I know we've got just a couple minutes left. I apologize. Almost everything we do is open source and free and available. I just didn't bring stacks of handouts not knowing what it is. If any of this resonates with you today, my goal would be to get you connected to that into your hands. We say we're powered by a regional network, and that network is anybody doing something that we'd like to celebrate alongside or somebody that's saying, hey, I'm interested in learning more about that, who can I connect to that's doing this work. I will leave it up here. I know we're running out of time. I was going to have us kind of develop with somebody next to you. I'm going to see what my last one was. We have some different templates that we use too that's sort of this one as we go. So I will leave this up for now. I can switch back and forth between the two. This kind of gives a good enough example. Any big picture questions before we go? Otherwise, I can hang out here to provide you with the resources you need. I want to be respectful of the time. Just to recap, if I held down the rewind button, and I'm sorry I got dizzy with like a dance, it's like a flash. But I started with that whole piece on the phone. And I think it's important to get that vision down for yourself. If you believe in this type of work, there comes a point in time where you keep investing in the landline, but you also have to, or you understand the shift you're going to make, you're going to cut the cord. I showed the two versions of the cell phone. I asked you in the beginning, what do you count on your phone, or what do you like? And nobody said, I like that it makes a call. The reality is with personalized learning, when we get it right, is that when you get it right, you know that the teachers are counting on the kids of doing a feature they probably didn't even realize that they could do. They're usually not just saying, oh, they're really good at listening to my information and repeating it back to me. That's usually not a good indicator of personalized learning. What they usually say is they can self-assess, they can manage their time, they can demonstrate understanding, they can create their own path, they can do those things. And that's kind of one of those pieces that sometimes it's just out of reach. I don't know if 20 years ago we knew what we'd be doing with our phones and all of the value that we'd count on that it has right now in our life. It's also what most people don't see is that 6 months from now, a year from now, or even 2 years from now, all the features that students will bring because of the personalized learning model. My own kids present with me a lot when I go on presentations and sessions. I didn't bring them today. I couldn't let them miss school this week. But what's interesting is this is the only thing that they know in their school. It's the only school they've been to. They don't know different. So when I tell them just to talk about school, they do not have a compare contrast. We do. We have two things to compare and contrast. We have the ability to look at what a model was where you sat and got, or you have a model is where you've had a different role. My son doesn't know what a typical lunch is anymore, or ever is, doesn't know what it means to be in a grade level. doesn't know what it means to not have control of demonstrating his own evidence of learning on an assessment. Those are key shifts that have occurred in his piece. I, as a dad, have to keep reminding myself of not caring about the right side of reading scores and test scores and other things, even though I'm always curious and check his MAP scores and want to make sure that there's growth there and all of those other things. At the same time, I know he's in a school that's investing in those other pieces, and I'm hoping, like we all do in this work, that that investment will play out not only for what he's learning now, but hopefully more importantly, for whatever challenge comes up next for my two kids and all kids in terms of their life and their trajectory. So. Sorry I threw a lot at you. It was 45 minutes. I tried to get at least a grounding of a little bit of not only what we do, but what we care about. If you want any resources at the end of this, let me know. Otherwise, have a great conference, and we'll see you today or tomorrow.